Hello, this is Tim Congdon, Chair of the Institute of International Monetary Research at the University of Buckingham. I give these monthly videos about the global economic scene, particularly as it reflects trends in money and banking. But every now and again I depart from that main script and talk about something more specific. Now today I want to talk about my own country, Britain, and I want to talk first of all about a recent number for GDP growth, and then I want to talk about the wider context of the British economy's supply side prospects over the next 5, 10, perhaps even 20, 25 years. There's been a lot of doom and gloom about the British economy for a long time, and understandably so, since the growth rate has fallen and living standards for many people haven't changed for 10, 20 years. Having said that, there are bright spots and areas of dynamism and growth, and these need to be remembered as well. Now the surprise was that in the first quarter of this year we had a growth rate of GDP of 0.7%, which may not sound like much, but that annualizes obviously at, in one quarter of 4 quarters, it's almost 3%. And although it may surprise you, but because of compound arithmetic, 3% a year means that output grows very substantially over 20 years, goes up, doubles, and over a century goes up enormously. So 3% economic growth, if it could be sustained, would be quite something. Now, I'm not that optimistic, but I do want to highlight some areas of positive news in the UK, which to some extent mean that the doom and gloom is misplaced, and we can look forward perhaps to better years. The area of dynamism in Britain is the area of service exports. Manufacturing has been in decline for decades now, but the exports of financial services and non-financial services have been booming. And this boom has more than offset the decline in manufacturing, so that national output altogether has been going up. Let's try and get some numbers on all this. This is a chart of the total figure for service exports from the UK for the 27 years to 2024. I mean, roughly speaking, the last generation. Generations normally taking maybe about 25 years or so. So this is the last 27 years. And in this period, Britain's service exports have gone up from £76 billion or so to over £500 billion. That's a compound annual rate of growth of almost 7.5%. Then try and translate this back into real terms and compare them with GDP. This chart shows you these numbers, and the typical increase in the price level in this period has been about 2.5% a year. That's on something called the GDP deflator. So the growth rate in real terms of these service exports has been 4.8% a year, almost 5% a year. The growth rate of Britain's total national output, GDP, in real terms in that same period has been about 1.5% a year. So plainly these areas have been far more expansionary, far more dynamic, far more positive than in the rest of the economy. And so the share of Britain's output has increased inevitably. Roughly speaking, whereas at the end of the 1990s, service exports were about 8% of GDP, they now are about 18% of GDP. So they are very large part of our sales to the rest of the world. Now I think probably, I need to check, but may even be exceeding the value of sales of goods to the rest of the world, but I need to check that number. One of the key issues here is the growth slowing down or accelerating, or is it just stable? So what I've done here is to, again, look at these numbers and put them into a context. One of the problems one has with this is that in doing charts, one tends just to use the arithmetic scale, which shows the amounts. But if you've got compound growth, of course, this tends to show always an accelerating, which is misleading. What we need to do is to look at a logarithmic scale, which I've done with this chart. And, well, what's your assessment? I think there are some ups and downs. Obviously, COVID in 2020-21 interrupted the growth a bit, and then recovery a bit in 22 and 23. But in fact, the correct overall verdict, I think, is that the trend growth rate is quite stable. It's been around about this 5% a year figure for some time. There are then some implications of all this. So we've got this trend growth rate, about 5% a year in real terms. We've got it that it's about 18% of national output, getting on for a fifth of national output. So this kind of long-run trend in these growing areas of the economy by themselves ought to contribute about 1% of growth a year, regardless of what's going on in the rest of the economy. The rest of the economy is just flat, then the growth here will chip in 1% growth of national output each year. Obviously, the bulk of this typical number in the last generation, about 1.5% a year. One of the things which is implied by the analysis I've just given is rather obvious, which is that the performance of the rest of the British economy is very, very poor. Part of the trouble in manufacturing is new regulations, regulations to reduce carbon emissions, regulations to protect labour rights and things like that. And then, of course, we know that in the public sector, in the National Health Service, for example, productivity has gone down in the last 10, 20 years. At any rate, the service export part of the economy is buoyant, dynamic, and so on. And the rest of the economy, I'm afraid, on the same basis, is doing rather badly. Looking ahead, the rest of the economy just simply has to, as it were, stand still, and we'll still be getting the growth from the dynamism of the service exports. Now, service exports are of three main kinds. There's things like transport, airlines, shipping lines, and then along with that, travel and tourism. And in those areas, Britain's performance isn't very special. We have a deficit on travel. As you'd expect, we don't have a particularly special climate. But those areas are not the ones of particular dynamism. The real dynamism has been, in the last generation, has been financial services and then non-financial services of various kinds. I'll talk about them a bit more shortly. Until 2008, the great financial crisis, financial service exports were just a phenomenal growth business. They were growing at around about 15% a year compound. And by the end of that period, they amounted, in fact, to around about 4% of GDP. Relatively low in employment terms, highly paid people, high value added per person, a lot of IT backup and things like that. At any rate, the dynamism there was such until for about 20, 30 years, up to about 2008, 2009, that they, as you can see in this chart, were starting to become more important than all of the non-financial service exports. That's the blue line here. We then had the great financial crisis, And the growth stopped for about 5 years. Resumed a bit more recently, but not at the same pace as before the great financial crisis. The real story of the boom here is really in non-financial business service exports in the last 15 years or so since the great financial crisis. That's demonstrated here by this red line, and you can see these are just by Britain's own standards, by global standards, these are remarkable growth industries. When you visit London and you see all the building going on, all of the streets being ripped up for new cables and new things all over the place, cranes everywhere, you would not think that this was an economy with a trend growth rate of 1% a year. Well, much of these activities do take place in London, and here I've given a list of them. There's legal work, there's advertising, there's things like recruitment agencies, there's the very important work done by the accounting firms, often in conjunction with tax consultancy and then wider kinds of consultancy, IT consultancy, and then there are other miscellaneous. But these areas, as I say, have been of strong growth for many years, but particularly in the last 15 years, and they've become more and more important to the British economy. Before I finish on this subject, I want to highlight what you might regard as a bit of a quirk in these numbers, which is that Britain seems very good at finding areas of business that are new and that because they're new and different, they may give special rewards to the businessmen who get involved with them. They'd be very profitable and worthwhile. But then they're difficult to categorize in official statistics. And that's true of the series here, which is a kind of other business services category. This shows you the numbers in the official figures, shows you the numbers for these are going back again to 1997. Their value is now put, its value actually in 2023 was put at about £65 billion. So this is a kind of miscellaneous other category, which hardly anybody knows exactly. Well, obviously somebody knows what's inside because it's £65 billion, employs lots of people, produces lots of output. £65 billion, over 2% of GDP, growing very strongly. And another point to highlight here is that the growth rate in the last 10 years of this particular category in the official numbers has been 11% a year nominal, which actually has been higher than in the past. Imagine trying to put together a national industrial strategy, a national industrial plan, an economic plan, with this kind of, where actually the official statisticians don't know how to categorize the activities going on inside this area of the economy. I suggest that the civil servants and politicians and their hangers-on really wouldn't have any idea. They couldn't predict even 5 or 10 years in advance what was going to be in this category or its growth rate. At any rate, its growth rate in the last 10 years has been 11% a year. Before I finish, let me just say also that we do have these dynamic parts of the British economy. One has to suspect that because of these difficulties in sorting out what's really going on, it may well be that in the last year or two, growth in the UK has been underestimated. There are problems at the moment with a survey, what's happening in the labour force and employment. Essentially, people aren't sending back the forms in sufficient quantity. But then over and above that, we've got these new products, new services. And there's a very special difficulty here, which is that we know in nominal terms what incomes are. It's very reliable because the numbers go to the tax authorities and because they must go by law to tax authorities. They're very reliable. National income equals national expenditure equals national output. That's just an identity. But to work out what's happening in real terms, we need to have a sense of what's happening at the price level. And so we need to have a price index, or what's called a price deflator. How do you work this out for a new set of activities? There's things like fintech, there's things like cryptocurrencies, there's things like online gambling. To some extent, the services provided in Britain of this kind are being sold abroad. Are they really output at all? Is for discussion, it seems to me. At any rate, how you deflate the income series, what price index you use, is up for grabs, it seems to me. According to the official figures, British GDP rose by 0.4% in 2023 and 1.1% in 2024. And then there's this surprise 0.7% in the first quarter. I don't know exactly what's going on. I suspect no one does. But my suspicion is that the numbers for 23 and 24 will be revised up in due course. I think all of the doom and gloom about Britain, although understandable, and indeed many things have gone wrong in Britain in the last 10, 20 years, although it's understandable, I must emphasize that there are areas of genuine dynamism, which means that the outlook isn't all bad. Thank you very much.